Leone had grown up believing that magic was a distant story, something told in hushed tones around fires but never meant to touch her life. Yet she was the only one in the village who walked with shimmering chains clasped around her wrists and ankles, glowing faintly under the sun and pulsing softly under the moonlight. At 25, she had learned to move gracefully despite them, but every step reminded her she was not free. The villagers claimed the chains were sacred, a divine protection placed on her to shield them from an ancient curse. They said she carried a darkness she could not control, that without the glowing bonds the entire village would suffer. But deep inside, Leone sensed another truth, one they refused to speak. Children watched her with wide eyes, pointing at her softly glowing cuffs as if she were a living legend. Adults avoided her gaze, bowing slightly when she passed, not out of respect but fear. They whispered behind her back, repeating the same story handed down by the elders, that Leone had been born with a dangerous gift, one capable of summoning destruction. Only through binding her with enchanted chains could that power be contained. But the chains did not feel like protection. They felt like captivity. They tightened whenever she questioned, whenever she resisted, whenever she stood still too long in thought. And though no one admitted it openly, she knew the tightening wasn't magic, it was control. The elders treated her with a watchful, unsettling kindness. They brought her food, gave her tasks, and spoke softly as if afraid she might break. But their eyes betrayed something else, a silent guilt. Leone saw it most in Elder Balika, a stern woman whose hands often trembled when adjusting the chains. Sometimes late at night, Leone heard the elders arguing near the central hut, their voices low and urgent. They spoke of keeping her contained, of not letting the truth resurface, and of the risk if she remembers. These words haunted Leone more than the chains themselves. She remembered little about how the shackles first appeared. There were flashes, cries in the night, hands gripping her arms, light bursting around her. After that, darkness. When she awoke, the chains were already there, glowing, humming gently like caged spirits. The villagers told her it was for her own good, that she had nearly doomed them all and the chains had saved her life. But as she grew older, fragments returned. Not of danger, of betrayal. She remembered trusting someone she shouldn't have. She remembered love turned into manipulation. She remembered being offered help only to be bound instead. These pieces formed a truth she still didn't fully understand, but enough to know the village story was a lie. Despite her captivity, Leone's spirit remained unbroken. She observed everything. She noticed how the chains dimmed whenever she felt calm, and brightened when she doubted herself. She noticed how the elders avoided any real discussion about her past. She noticed how the villagers' fear felt rehearsed as though taught rather than felt. And she noticed how the forest, to everyone else forbidden, seemed to call her, the wind brushing her skin like a familiar friend. That calling grew stronger as she learned to listen to her heart instead of their stories. She felt something within her, not darkness but warmth, power and clarity, struggling to break free. She began to question the meaning of magic. What if the chains were not protecting the village from her, but protecting the village from the truth of what they did to her? What if the shimmering spell around her was not a shield, but a prison crafted from fear and guilt? Every day her awareness sharpened. Every day she walked closer to understanding. And every day the chains trembled, as if afraid she might finally uncover the secret they were meant to hide. You said. The lie began long before Leone was old enough to understand it. The chains, the glowing cuffs the villagers worshipped and feared, had not been a divine gift. They had been forged by the very hands that pretended to protect her. Elder Balika, Elder Unati, and Elder Django had stood around her when she was barely old enough to speak, weaving chants and symbols into metal that shimmered like moonlight. They called it a ritual of balance. They told the village the chains would keep her harmonies from overwhelming the land. But the truth, buried beneath layers of fear and deception, was far darker. Leone learned the word harmonies from the elders. They used it like a weapon, sweet on the surface, poisonous underneath. They claimed she was born with too much spiritual resonance, an energy that could twist nature, stir winds and call storms. They warned the villagers she might bring ruin, painting her as a danger wrapped in a gentle face. But the more she grew, the more she realized something was off. The chains tightened when she felt strong. They dimmed when she felt weak. They reacted not to danger but to her own confidence. Slowly she began noticing patterns. Whenever she touched the earth, the chains warmed. Whenever she looked at the sky with longing, they pulsed. When her emotions stirred, the metal hummed like something feeding. And then came the most telling discovery. After long days of feeling drained and listless, She would see the elders in unusually strong spirits, vibrant in ways that made no sense for their old age. Their skin glowed as though lit from inside. Their steps grew lighter. Elder Django's long-standing cough had disappeared completely. Elder Balika, once fragile, now carried heavy baskets with ease. Something was being transferred. She felt it deep in her bones. It began subtly at first, tiny flickers she couldn't explain. When she touched a flower, it wilted for a moment before returning to life. When she walked past the river, ripples formed without wind. When she cried in the privacy of her hut, the candle flames bent toward her tears. These weren't signs of danger. They were signs of strength, strength being drained and misdirected. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Leone stood alone in the village center. Children played nearby, their laughter carrying in the air, but she felt something tug at her wrists. The glow from her chains brightened, not steady but rhythmic, like a heartbeat not her own. She pressed her fingers against the metal. It felt alive, greedy. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over her, and she knew, with terrifying clarity, that something was taking from her. The elders' shadows appeared moments later, long and eerie in the fading light. Their eyes watched her too closely. Their smiles were too controlled. It was then she realized she was not cursed, she was being harvested. Her harmonies were not a threat to the land. They were a source of power the elders had learned to steal. And for the first time in her life, the chains felt less like magic and more like a lie tightened around her soul. Leone began to notice it on a day when frustration burned hotter than the sun overhead. She had dropped a basket of grain, and the elders scolded her as if the world had ended. Their words stung not because of their harshness but because of the way they always spoke to her, as though she were fragile, unstable, something that needed to be contained. Anger rose like fire in her chest, and in that moment the chains around her wrists pulsed sharply, a bright flash of silver-blue light racing across the links. Everyone froze. Even the elders stared wide-eyed for a moment before masking their fear with fake calm. But Leone felt it, felt something inside the chains tremble in reaction to her emotion, as if startled. And even more, she felt something inside herself push back. When she calmed, the chains dimmed, but a faint echo of heat remained beneath the metal. It was the first time she realized the chains reacted not randomly, but precisely to her inner world. After that moment she began watching them more closely. Whenever a flicker of hope rose in her, when she heard a child laugh, when a gentle breeze touched her hair, when she imagined a life without restraint, the chains hummed softly, glowing as if trying to drink in the feeling. But when she felt fear or sadness, the metal tightened, the glow fading into a dull, hungry gray. The patterns became clearer with each passing day. Anger made the chains tremble. Joy made them brighten. Resolve made them thrum like a distant drumbeat. Whenever she felt strong, the chains became greedy, warming, vibrating, consuming. Whenever she felt weak, they rested, inert and lifeless. This was not suppression. It was feeding. One afternoon, Leone sat by the river, pretending to wash clothes while she watched her reflection. The light from the chains shimmered on the water. As she reached out to touch the surface, imagining the coolness of the river claiming her skin, the chains sparked, rippling outward like a dropped stone. The water stirred in response, not from her movement but from something deeper. Even the wind shifted, curling around her in a soft spiral. She jerked her hand back, breath sharp. The chains had not stopped the reaction, they had reacted with her. It was as though the magic that flowed through the forest and sky recognized her, and the chains acted like a barrier trying to interfere, only to fail. Later that night she tried a small experiment. She thought of freedom, truly thought of it, let the image take shape behind her eyes, herself running without restraint, without fear, without elders watching her every breath. The pulse in the chains accelerated instantly, flashing brighter than she had ever seen. But something else happened. A faint spark, like a spark struggling to escape, jumped from the chain into the air before fading. The chains were not suppressing her. They were absorbing her. Another day she overheard elders talking. Elder Balika whispered, "Her harmonies flared too often. She must be weakening. Good. The less she feels, the more we gain." The word struck her like a knife. She slipped away, heart pounding. Every strange moment made sense now. The drained mornings. The elders' unnaturally strong energy. The way she felt hollow after bouts of intense emotions. She was the source of their power. Her life force, her magic, her birthright, they were using it to maintain their position. But the most surprising truth was this: the stronger she felt, the more the chains struggled. And that meant something enormous. The chains were not invincible. They were afraid of her. "You said The day the truth began to shift, the sun was low, an orange disk melting behind the distant hills. Leone was sitting near the riverbank, staring at her reflection rippling across the water. The chains around her wrists shimmered faintly, reacting to her thoughts again. She pressed her fingers against them, wondering how something so beautiful could be so cruel. A soft crunch of footsteps made her look up. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the tree line, leaning on a carved stick decorated with dried herbs. Her eyes, cloudy yet sharp, rested on the chains, not on Leone. "You wear them heavily," the old woman whispered. Leone stiffened. "Everyone says they protect the village." The woman chuckled, a low sound filled with years of disbelief. "Child, chains never protect. They only bind." She moved closer, and Leone noticed the strange symbols tattooed along her forearms, spirals, roots, and tiny marks shaped like wind patterns. The villagers often called her Mama Nalwazi, a harmless herbalist who kept to herself. But the air around her felt different today, older, heavier. "Who are you really?" Leone asked. Mama Nalwazi sat beside her, the river breeze lifting her gray braids. "I am the last of the old keepers," she said. "I knew magic before your elders pretended they knew any." Leona's heart thudded. You know what these chains are?" Mama Nalwazi reached out but did not touch the chains. Instead, she studied them the way a hunter studies a trap before breaking it. "They were crafted using binding spells forbidden even in the ancient world," she said quietly. "Spells meant for spirits too wild, too powerful, too dangerous for mortal hands." Leone swallowed hard. "Why me?" "That," the old woman said, "is the secret your elders fear you discovering." The river whispered as though listening. Mama Nalwazi continued, "Those chains are not meant to suppress magic. They are made to feed on it. Every breath you take, every strong emotion, every flicker of your gift, they drink it. The elders grow stronger while you grow weaker." Leone felt the world tilt. "But they told me I was cursed. They told me the chains stopped the curse from spreading." "Lies," Mama Nalwazi said simply. "Your power was never a curse. It was a gift, one your family once protected. But after they were gone, the elders twisted the story." Leona's pulse raced as memories flickered. Her mother's warm hands, her father's quiet warnings, shadows in the night. Things she had dismissed as childhood confusion now sharpened into painful clarity. Mama Nalwazi leaned in, her voice dropping to a grave whisper. "Listen carefully, Leone. If you break those chains, the power they've taken from you will return. All of it. At once." Leone felt the chains tighten, or shiver. She couldn't tell. "But," the old woman warned, "power that returns too quickly does not always return gently." Leone looked at her wrists, then at the old woman. "What happens if I don't break them?" Mama Nalwazi's expression darkened. "Then the elders will drain you until there is nothing left." The first crack appeared the following morning. Leone woke to a faint humming beneath her skin, a low vibration like the murmur of distant drums. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, but then she felt it again, the chains warming against her wrists. She lifted her hands and gasped. The metal was glowing softly as though something inside it had begun to stir. She pushed herself upright, heart pounding. The chains had always been cold, cold even under the noonday sun. But now they felt alive, responding to some deep pulse rising from within her. She closed her eyes and exhaled. The glow dimmed. She inhaled sharply. The glow brightened. "It's reacting to me," she realized. Her emotions, her breath, her will. When she stepped outside her hut, a few villagers stared. Not at her, but at the flicker of light dancing around her wrists. Whispers rose immediately. "Her chains, they are changing. This is not normal. Has something gone wrong with the binding?" By midday, the whispers had spread across the entire village like wildfire. And the elders heard. The council summons came abruptly. Leone was marched into the meeting hall, a circular hut supported by carved wooden pillars. The elders sat in their elevated seats like hawks guarding a rotting carcass. Elder Mzamo, the one who had always spoken the loudest about protecting the village from Leone's curse, stared directly at her glowing wrists. "What have you done?" he hissed. Leone lifted her head slowly. "Nothing. The chains are changing on their own." A murmur rippled through the hall. Elder Senna leaned forward, her lips tight. "Magic cannot shift without cause. Something has disturbed the spell." Leone felt heat rising in her chest. Anger. Fear. A spark of something she could not yet name. And just like that, the chains glowed brighter. The elders recoiled. Mzamo slammed his staff on the ground. "Tighten them." Leone took a step back instinctively. No. Senna sneered. You do not have a choice. But something in Liana had shifted. The visit from Mama Nawazi, the truth she had learned, every revelation was pushing her courage upward, rising like a tide. You told me these chains protected the village, she said sharply. But from what? My power? Or your lies? The elders stiffened. Nervous glances passed between them, quick, sharp, fearful. Fear. It shocked Liana to realize it. They were afraid of her. Not the chains, her. Mzamo barked, restrain her now, before the bindings unravel. 2 guards rushed forward, but the moment they touched her, the chains pulsed violently. A shockwave burst outward, knocking both men backward. Gasps filled the hall. Liana stood trembling, staring at her wrists. The chains were loosening, ever so slightly, as if responding to her desire to be free. One link even gave a soft metallic crack. Senna rose to her feet, voice trembling for the first time. This is dangerous. If the chains break, her magic will surge uncontrollably. But Mzamo shook his head, panic overtaking reason. No, if they break, everything we stole from her returns. She will know everything we've done. More cracks appeared, small hairline fractures that glowed from within. Liana stepped forward. Tell me the truth. Mzamo snarled. You were never meant to know the truth. The chains pulsed harder as anger surged in her veins. Then why bind me? She demanded. Mzamo's mask finally shattered. Because your power was too great to control. We needed it. Senna shouted, Mzamo. But he continued, voice rising, dripping with desperation. We drained it to keep our rules strong. We did what we had to do. The hall fell silent. The truth hung in the air like a blade. And on Liana's wrists, the chains split even further, cracks glowing like molten fire. She looked at them, at the metal that had defined her entire life, and felt something shift deep inside her. Strength long swallowed was waking. The villagers watching from the doorway saw it too. And in their eyes she did not see fear. She saw hope. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky was calm, heavy with the heat of late evening. The next, thunder split the air like a war cry, shaking the village to its roots. Liana stood at the doorway of her hut, watching the clouds churn like restless spirits. She felt something in the air, an electric pull, a whisper sliding over her skin. The storm was not natural. It was old, carrying the weight of forces that remembered her bloodline. Then the first lightning struck, and the chains answered. A sharp, metallic tremor shot through her wrists. The glow returned, no longer gentle or flickering but fierce, rhythmic, like a heartbeat reborn. She staggered back as the metal heated, pulsed, and vibrated. Bum, bum, bum. The chains were waking. Her breath hitched. The herbalist's warning echoed in her mind. Breaking them will unleash more than freedom. Wind howled through the village, slamming doors, shaking roofs. But inside Liana's hut, the storm had its own center, her. She lifted her hands. Lightning flashed, and the chains erupted in a blaze of silver-blue light. For a moment she thought the storm had struck her directly, but then she realized the truth. The storm wasn't attacking her. It was responding to her. It was feeding her. A surge of energy rushed through her body, ancient and wild, flooding veins that had long been starved. She gasped as her knees buckled, gripping the wall for support. Her magic, buried, suppressed, suffocated, was rising like a wave tearing free from confinement. Outside, villagers began gathering despite the rain. Do you hear that? It's the metal, it's shaking. The chains are moving on their own. They stood shivering under the storm as the trembling grew louder, echoing like drums from a distant battlefield. Some villagers made the sign of protection, others watched in awe. They had always feared the storm, feared the unknown, but tonight, fear felt like a warning carved by the sky itself. Inside the hut, the chains jerked upward as if alive, lifting Liana's arms toward the ceiling. She cried out, not from pain but from the sheer force coursing through her. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Another lightning strike hit the ground outside, splitting a tree. The villagers screamed. But Liana didn't flinch. Her heart was racing in perfect rhythm with the thunder. The storm and her magic were speaking the same language. The chains shook harder. Clink, clink, clang. Until sparks danced along the cracks that had formed earlier. The metal was not suppressing her anymore. It was resisting her. And losing. A deep rumble rolled across the sky, and with it, Liana felt the most powerful surge yet. An ancient recognition, like the forest winds embracing a long-lost daughter. She spread her fingers. The light from her chains burst outward. A beam of energy shot across the room, splitting the wooden table in half. Villagers outside saw the flash through the hut walls and stumbled back. That is no ordinary magic. It's the old power. The power the elders warned us about. But there was no malice in the force. Only release. Only truth. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating Leone's silhouette through the thin hut walls, standing upright, arms raised, chains glowing like molten rivers wrapped around her skin. Children clung to their mothers. Elders held their breath. Even the storm seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Then, crack. A large split tore across one of the wrist chains. The sound echoed through the village like prophecy. The storm roared in response, the wind spiraling around the huts as though celebrating, or perhaps warning, that something ancient was awakening. Leone lowered her hands slowly. Her breathing steadied. Her magic settled. But it did not hide again. Tonight the chains had stirred. And everyone, every villager, every elder hiding in their chambers, knew. They would not hold her much longer. When dawn finally pushed aside the remains of the storm, Leone felt different. Steady, sharpened, awakened in ways she couldn't fully name. The chains on her wrists were warm, humming softly as though still dreaming of lightning. But something else had changed too. Through the cracks created in the night, unfamiliar markings had appeared, faint, glowing symbols etched beneath the surface of the metal. They pulsed slowly like breathing. Leone lifted her wrists toward the morning light. At first glance, they looked like strange scratches caused by the storm's impact. But the more she stared, the clearer they became, ancient inscriptions written in a language no villager spoke anymore. A memory stirred. The old herbalist's voice drifted back. These bindings were not made for mortals. They were made for spirits, or those powerful enough to become one. Leone ran her fingers over the glowing marks. As her skin touched them, they brightened, reacting to her like a long-lost key returning to its lock. A sudden rush of warmth traveled up her arm and into her chest. A voice, not quite spoken, not quite imagined, whispered inside her mind. Power taken must return. Chains broken must reveal the true bearer. Her breath hitched. These were not symbols of suppression. They were instructions. Stepping outside her hut, she walked toward the forest's edge where the storm winds had left the ground damp and glowing with rain. She knelt and pressed her wrist to the soil. The symbols illuminated again, swirling with faint silver light. And then she saw it. A memory, no, a vision, burst across her mind. A circle of elders stood around a younger version of her, lying unconscious. Her wrists glowed with her own magic, wild, untamed, magnificent. But instead of guiding her, the elders bent over her, chanting words that twisted like shadows. They drained her power into the chains they forged, binding her strengths into metal they could control. Her power is too great, one elder had said. If she breaks these bindings, she will inherit everything we stole. She will become what we feared she would be. Their faces flickered in the vision, fearful, greedy, desperate. Leone gasped and stumbled back, the memory fading. Her heart raced. The truth stood clear. The chains had not been forged to protect the village from her. They had been forged to protect the elders from the consequences of their theft. She looked again at the inscriptions. Now she understood them fully. Whoever breaks chains forged from stolen magic becomes the rightful master of all the power contained within. Not just hers. Theirs. Every spell, every ability, every bit of strength the elders had drained from her, would return to her tenfold the moment the chains shattered. Her cracked wrist chain glimmered in the morning sun, as if acknowledging her discovery. The elders' greatest fear had never been her power as a young woman. It had been the prophecy buried inside the metal they forced onto her skin. And now that the first crack had appeared, there was no hiding from destiny. The spell they tried so hard to bury was rising. And Leone was ready to claim what belonged to her. The confrontation began at sunset, when the sky burned red like an omen. The elders summoned Leone to the sacred clearing, pretending it was a ritual check, but their trembling voices and restless eyes revealed their true intentions. They had seen the cracks in her chains, felt the shifting energy in the air, and understood that the power they once stole was slipping from their grasp. She stood before them, calm but alert, the cracked metal around her wrists still faintly glowing. The villagers gathered at a distance, sensing something monumental approaching. Whispers rippled through the crowd like dry leaves in wind. Her chains, they're changing. The elders look afraid. Why is the air humming? The head elder stepped forward, holding a staff carved with stolen symbols of magic, symbols that once belonged to Leone's lineage. His voice shook beneath false authority. You dare tamper with your bindings? He demanded. These chains keep the village safe. Leone lifted her gaze, steady and unflinching. Safe from what? She asked softly. My power, or the truth? A murmur rolled through the villagers. The elders shifted uncomfortably. That magic is dangerous, another elder barked. Without these chains you would destroy us. No, Leone replied, her voice carrying more weight than any chant. Without these chains you lose control. The elders stiffened. They exchanged frantic glances. Fear, not of danger but of exposure, flickered in their eyes. And in that moment, Leone saw it clearly. They weren't trying to save the village. They were trying to save themselves. Something inside her cracked open, not just anger but years of humiliation, confusion, and buried power. The storm within her stirred, lifting with emotions she had never allowed herself to fully feel. Pain for what they stole. Clarity of what she was becoming. Courage she had been forced to suppress. And anger, deep, righteous anger. The air thickened. The ground tensed beneath her feet. The chains began to tremble. A metallic hum rose from them, vibrating through her bones. The villagers gasped and stepped back as the symbols along the metal flared to life, glowing with fierce, ancient light. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the chains, faster, louder, stronger. Stop her, the head elder yelled. Contain the magic. She must not break them. But it was too late. The storm inside Leone erupted. Light exploded from her skin, white, gold, and blinding, like the sun breaking through centuries of darkness. The chains convulsed, twisting violently as if resisting fate itself. But the inscriptions, the spell they tried to bury, awakened fully, choosing their rightful master. A sharp crack split the air. Then another. Then, boom. The chains shattered in a brilliant burst of light, scattering fragments like falling stars. The explosion of magic swept through the clearing, tearing through illusions, burning through lies, and ripping apart every hidden ritual the elders had woven for decades. The villagers screamed, not in fear of Leone, but in awe as hidden symbols rose from the ground, glowing sigils burst from the temple walls, and dark enchantments unraveled in the air like ash caught in wind. Secret sacrifices. Forbidden spells. Protection charms that were really power-draining rituals. Everything the elders hid was exposed in the blinding light of her freedom. The elders fell to their knees, clutching their chests as the magic they stole was ripped out of them and returned to its rightful owner. Their staffs cracked. Their voices died in their throats. Their authority evaporated. Leone stood at the center of the storm, unbound, radiant, powerful, not as a threat, but as a truth the village could no longer deny. She gazed at her bare wrists, glowing with the energy that had once been stolen. The chains were gone. The lies were burning. And the world would never be the same. You said. The moment the chains shattered, Leone felt the rush of stolen years flooding back into her veins. It wasn't just energy, it was memory, intuition, and strength, all bound together, returning to their rightful place. Her senses sharpened. The rustle of the leaves spoke secrets, the wind carried whispers of long-forgotten truths, and even the smallest movements of the villagers revealed their hidden thoughts and fears. She lifted her hands, now unbound, and felt the magic bend to her will. Every pulse, every flicker of light within her reflected a history she had never fully known, a lineage of power, cunning, and resilience. The chains had once confined her body, but they could never cage the essence of who she was. Now that essence radiated outward, filling the clearing with a presence that demanded recognition. Villagers stared, eyes wide, breaths caught in throats. They had lived in a world controlled by the elders' lies, believing that the magic belonged to those who ruled. Now they saw the truth, it had always been hers. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by awe. Others recoiled, fear battling with disbelief. Children whispered, pointing, unable to fully grasp what they saw but feeling the shift in the air, the shift in reality itself. Leone's mind expanded with clarity. She understood the threads of power that had been woven into the village, the subtle manipulations of those who had sought to control not only her but everyone around her. Each deception, every act of greed, was now visible to her as if a veil had been lifted. And yet, her heart remained steady. She had power, yes, but she also had the wisdom to wield it with precision. She raised her voice, not in words but in command. A soft ripple of energy emanated from her, and the environment responded. Hidden charms dissolved, protective wards realigned, and the village itself seemed to breathe differently, as if exhaling centuries of oppression. Every act that had bound her, that had stolen her strength, now bent in obedience to her will, recognizing their true master. Even the elders trembled. Their eyes, once filled with authority and fear of loss, now reflected the inevitability of their undoing. The magic they had tried to hoard could no longer be confined, manipulated, or hidden. It pulsed, alive and aligned with the rightful owner, the woman they had underestimated, restrained, and betrayed. And Leone understood something crucial. Power alone was meaningless without clarity and justice. Her vision sharpened, her spirit soared. She could undo wrongs, protect the innocent, and restore balance. The village, which had once seen her as nothing more than a captive, now recognized that she was the axis around which truth, strength, and freedom would turn. The chains that once enslaved her lay shattered at her feet, glowing faintly as if acknowledging their failure. The magic had returned home. And Leone, standing tall in the dawn light, knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer a pawn, no longer hidden, no longer powerless. Every stolen second, every stolen ounce of energy, now fueled the rise of the woman who had always been destined to reclaim it. The elders had gathered in the center of the village, their faces pale and their breaths shallow. They had thought themselves untouchable, masters of magic and arbiters of control. But as the remnants of the shattered chains glimmered at Leone's feet, the true nature of power became unmistakably clear. They had stolen, manipulated, and bound a force far greater than their understanding, and now that force had returned to its rightful owner. No words were necessary. Leone raised her gaze, and the air around her pulsed with energy, invisible yet unmistakable. A subtle hum rolled through the village, vibrating against bones, echoing in the chest, making hearts pound with unspoken fear. It was as if the world itself had acknowledged the shift, recognizing the justice that was unfolding. The elders' knees buckled and their staffs trembled in their hands. The magic they had hoarded, siphoned, and twisted recoiled, slipping like water through fingers. Enchantments they had thought permanent unraveled in the air, banners of their deceit crumbling like brittle leaves. They felt their authority evaporating, not by force but because the universe itself would not sustain it. Every charm, every ritual they had twisted to their will now rejected them. Leone's expression was calm, unwavering. She did not need to utter a word nor strike a blow. The magic she carried, now whole and aligned with truth, enacted what was necessary. Every whisper of greed, every moment of manipulation, every act of betrayal that had been stored in their aura now surfaced, visible not to the villagers but to themselves. Guilt, fear, and shame became tangible weights, pressing them into the dirt, stripping away their ill-gotten pride. One by one their hands, once instruments of control, shook uncontrollably. Staves cracked, cords unraveled, amulets darkened and fell from their necks. The elders' own magic turned against them, as if the essence of what they had stolen was now too pure to be misused. They tried to speak, to defend themselves, but no sound held power anymore. Their voices were swallowed by the energy that Leone commanded, rendering them impotent against the very force they had betrayed. The villagers watched in awe and trepidation. They had lived under the weight of deception, believing in the elders' supremacy, fearing their authority. Now they saw the truth. The elders' power was never inherent. It had been stolen, bound, and wielded unjustly. Their fall was neither violent nor merciless. It was the inevitable consequence of imbalance restored. Magic, in its truest form, cannot sustain falsehood. Leone stepped forward. She did not touch them, she did not punish them with words or weapons. Her presence alone, radiant, sovereign, just, was enough. The elders' eyes met hers, and for the first time, they saw themselves not as rulers but as diminished figures, their influence stripped by the very power they had coveted. In the clearing, the wind seemed to sigh, carrying away the remnants of fear and oppression. The village, once cloaked in secrecy and manipulated by deceit, breathed freely. Children ran past the elders, unafraid, sensing the shift in authority. Even the earth beneath the elders seemed to reject them, tilting slightly toward the rightful power, the magic and wisdom that had always belonged to Leone. By the end of the day, the elders were no longer feared. Their names would carry lessons, not authority. And standing tall amidst the glowing remnants of the chains, Leone understood that the fall of those who bound her was the beginning of true freedom. For her, for the village, and for the legacy of justice that magic demanded. The dawn after the elders' fall was unlike any the village had seen in generations. Sunlight spilled across the rooftops, catching on rooftops and stone paths with a warmth that felt almost sacred, as if the very earth recognized the change that had swept through it. Leone walked among the villagers, her steps calm yet purposeful, radiating authority not from fear, but from the clarity of truth and restored magic. Every gaze that met hers reflected a mixture of awe, gratitude, and cautious hope. The village itself seemed to awaken alongside her. The old rituals that had enforced control and secrecy were abandoned, replaced by practices that honored life, balance, and the natural flow of power. Magic, once feared and hoarded by a select few, was now a shared resource, approached with respect and careful guidance. Villagers who had previously been timid, fearful of drawing attention, now experimented cautiously, learning to channel energy in harmony rather than domination. Children were the first to embrace the change fully. They ran freely through the open fields and forest paths, laughing as they attempted small sparks of light and wind, their eyes wide with wonder at the playful force that surrounded them. Leone watched them closely, guiding their hands when needed, correcting their technique with patience, and always reminding them that power must be balanced with responsibility. Every flicker of magic, every burst of wind or glow, was met with encouragement and praise, not punishment. These young villagers would grow knowing that strength was not about control over others but harmony with the world. The adults, initially cautious, began to follow her example. They relearned what it meant to live without deception and manipulation. Village councils were reorganized, decisions made openly, and transparency replaced secrecy. People who had once clung to fear-driven authority now sought guidance, learning from Leone's calm wisdom rather than the old coercive methods. Even the elders, humbled by their fall, became students of balance, slowly understanding that the magic they had misused demanded respect, not domination. Markets buzzed with new energy, artisans infused magic into their crafts, farmers encouraged plants to grow in harmony with the natural flow, and healers applied spells with care and compassion. The forest, once a place of trepidation and danger, became a symbol of connection and learning, a living classroom where villagers could explore their abilities safely under Leone's watchful eye. Through it all, Leone's presence remained steady, a reminder that true power lies not in chains or fear, but in guidance, integrity, and courage. Her story spread through the village like wildfire, inspiring those who had doubted themselves to trust their instincts, embrace their abilities, and act with responsibility. She had not only reclaimed her own life and magic but had transformed the village into a community where empowerment replaced oppression, and wonder replaced fear. By nightfall, the village rested in newfound peace. Lights flickered warmly in every home, and the air was alive with quiet magic. Children slept dreaming of possibilities, adults reflected on lessons learned, and Leone, standing at the center of the village square, understood that the rebirth she had fostered would endure for generations, an unbroken cycle of balance, respect, and the power of a woman who refused to be bound. Leone's name soon became more than a whisper in the village. It became a symbol of unyielding courage, a living legend that reshaped the understanding of magic and power for generations. The chains that had once bound her were now nothing more than fragments, scattered on the ground like reminders of a past dominated by fear and control. Yet they carried a story of betrayal, cunning, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Villagers young and old repeated her tale, embellishing it with awe and reverence, but no legend could capture the depth of her wisdom, the precision of her intelligence, or the quiet, relentless strength that had guided her every step. As the years unfolded, Leone continued to lead by example, not by commanding others, but by embodying the principles of balance, respect, and responsibility. The village, once cloaked in fear of magic, transformed into a place of learning and harmony. The forest, which had been a place of warning and superstition, became a sanctuary. Here, children learned the subtle arts of listening to the wind, sensing the pulse of the earth, and understanding the rhythms of energy that flowed through all living things. They watched Leone move through the trees, her steps light, deliberate, and reverent, feeling the strength of someone who had faced the impossible and emerged unbroken. Her influence was not limited to the young. Adults who had once adhered to the oppressive structures of the elders now sought guidance. They came to her with questions, unsure how to navigate their newfound freedom or control their emerging abilities. Leone met each of them with patience. She taught that power was not meant to dominate but to harmonize, that magic, like the wind, could be gentle or fierce, but should never be used to harm or control others. Lessons were woven into daily life, and slowly the culture of secrecy and fear dissolved into a culture of openness, accountability, and shared responsibility. Even the elders who had bound her with chains were not cast out entirely. Some remained, humbled and reflective, seeking to repair the harm they had caused. Leone guided them through rituals of restitution, helping them untangle the webs of misused magic they had spun. Those who genuinely sought redemption found a place in the village, not as rulers but as learners. And those who resisted faced the subtle, unavoidable consequences of their own actions. The magic they had twisted against Leone had become a mirror of truth, reflecting their failures and shortcomings in ways that could no longer be hidden. Leone herself grew in ways even she had never anticipated. Freed from the chains, her natural abilities blossomed, expanding far beyond what she had imagined. She could feel the currents of magic in the soil, the air, and the water. She could sense the emotional echoes of the village, guiding her in subtle acts of intervention that prevented conflict before it erupted. The power that had been siphoned from her was now a wellspring, not only for herself but for the entire community. Her intuition became legendary. She could read situations, predict outcomes, and offer solutions with a grace that made her seem almost otherworldly. The story of the spellbreaker spread beyond the village, carried by travelers and merchants to neighboring communities. Tales of a woman who had shattered enchanted chains and reclaimed her stolen power inspired those who lived under tyranny, whether magical, social, or political. Her name became synonymous with courage, resilience, and wisdom. People spoke of her not just as a survivor, but as a transformer of worlds. Someone who had turned oppression into opportunity, fear into enlightenment, and bondage into freedom. Festivals were held in her honor. Each year, as the chains that once confined her were commemorated in symbolic rituals, the villagers recounted her triumphs. Children dressed in shimmering garments, imitating the glint of her broken chains, while elders told of the day when magic itself recognized its rightful master. Leone attended these celebrations quietly, observing with a modest smile, never seeking accolades, but knowing that the heart of her legacy lay in the empowerment of others. Her teachings were codified into lessons, passed from generation to generation. Stories of caution against misuse of power, tales of courage in the face of betrayal, and the philosophy that freedom and balance were inseparable became central to the village's culture. Young people were encouraged to question, explore, and test their abilities, always mindful that true strength lay not in domination but in understanding. Leone's story served as the ultimate proof that no chain, no matter how magical or terrifying, could restrain a spirit that was aligned with truth and justice. And yet, Leone herself remained grounded. She walked the same forest paths she had once feared, feeling the wind brush against her face, reminding her of the trials she had endured. Each gust carried lessons, whispers of the past, and the subtle energy of life thriving in harmony. She understood that power without humility could still corrupt, that even the strongest spirit needed guidance, and that freedom was a continuous responsibility, not a one-time victory. By the end of her days, Leone's presence was woven into the very fabric of the village. The forest no longer whispered warnings but sang songs of resilience. The villagers no longer feared magic but embraced it with reverence. Children inspired by her story grew up with courage that rivaled even her own, learning that a single person's defiance against injustice could ripple outward, reshaping worlds. And as Leone passed into legend, the wind seemed to carry her laughter, her wisdom, and the indomitable strength of her spirit, reminding all who listened that the chains of deceit and oppression could always be broken by those who refused to surrender. Thus, the spellbreaker became eternal, not just a woman but a living lesson, a myth, and a guiding force. Her courage redefined what it meant to wield power. The chains of oppression were no longer feared but understood as challenges to overcome, and her legacy ensured that freedom, wisdom, and balance would endure in the village forever. Leone, the woman who had once been bound by magic, had become the embodiment of its rightful use, powerful, just, and unshakable.